The Professors is brought to you by Blackborder.com, a Magic the Gathering site with the best stories and best pros in the game. You can also pre-order Magic 2011 boxes at $89.99, so go check out Blackborder.com today. Hello everybody and welcome to yet another episode of The Professors. This week we're taking a break from Rise of the Eldrazi draft and M11 spoilers due to their lack of appearance on the spoiler this past week, so we'll discuss the results of the Star City Games 5K standard portion of Seattle and changes in extended and the value of currency in Magic. So let's draw. One month ago, at Grand Prix Washington, D.C., the big deck in Standard was Blue-White Control. Sure, it wasn't the old Blue-White Control from nearly 3 months ago that played Iona and Jace the Mind Sculptors in the main deck as its only win conditions, but old enough to be outdated in 2 weeks by a mashup of decks at the Star City Games Philly Open. This mashup included Mono-Red, Blue-Green Polymorph, but most importantly, Mythic Conscription, which did fine against the variants of Blue-White rocked at the tournament. As a result, Mythic Conscription took up half of the top 8 of the Philadelphia Standard Open, including a local player, Jason Cawley. The deck engineered recently to beat Conscription, Turboland, was first seen at the Philly 5K 2 weeks ago by Ale and Tracy, where it had a single spot in the top 8, but was seen in Seattle being piloted by Luis Vargas to second place. However, what is the deck to be remembered from Seattle, Philadelphia, and Grand Prix DC, with 7 top 8s and a win ranking just above Mythic Conscription due to some placing? Maybe you forgot about the deck with all this evolution in the metagame, but the answer is Jund. Now, no matter how good Baneslayer and Jace the Mind Sculptor get in any deck, and no matter how useful these cards are in a matchup against Jund, still being the best deck in the format, Baneslayer and Jace 2.0 will always be too expensive, and there will never be enough copies to go around. But we'll cover that in this week's third segment. Anyway, point is, should you play Jund? My answer for the first time is yes. Prior to Rise of the Eldrazi, Jund was great, but fell victim to cards that just flat out destroyed you like Spreading Seas, mainboard Sphinx of Draw Isles, and sideboarded Day of Judgments. And, well, after Rise of the Eldrazi, cards like Wall of Omens and Gideon Jura didn't make the matchup any better, but a few cards from Rise did help out the Jund player, and is seeing more and more play in Jund sideboards to fix any mana problems that arose and allowed you to power out bigger or more creatures versus Wall of Omens. The answer is Prophetic Prism. First off, cantrips for 2 mana as effectively cyclers aren't that bad in Jund postboard, being that you only have 4 effective 2-drops, Putrid Leech, being that Terminate really only mattered later game and was potentially boarded out versus Blue-White Control. Second, paralleling the card to Spreading Seas, it fixes the mana problems Spreading Seas causes, and has the same cantrip effect. Now, normally as I showed you 2 weeks ago with Plummet and Baneslayer Angel, this isn't enough, because Prophetic Prism appears as the Tier 2 reaction to a Tier 1 card. However, the Prism does more than that. It fixes mana even when Spreading Seas isn't locking you out of lands, which is to say, when you're playing with a mana base that just isn't good enough to have that many come into play untapped lands and play cards like Sprouting Thrynax or even Blightning on turn 3. Too many players design and play decks based on a single ideal situation, in which you play your second turn Terminate, your third turn Sprouting Thrynax, your fourth turn Bloodbird Elf, which cascades into a Blighting, and you're good. Which is why Mono Red sounds so good when you can get a 4th turn kill every time, but doesn't sound so good after you run into triple Wall of Reverence. Decks with counterspells and removal outside of burn spells, on the other hand, can't play the game proactively at all, and thus can't play based on a best case scenario. They have to tune their removal or counters to the type of spells you think the guy or girl on the other side of the table is playing. Is Jund 50% of the metagame? If so, it sounds like you need Essence Scatters and Flash Freezes, and maybe even Day of Judgments in the main board. Is Mythic Conscription dominant? Sounds like you need Path to Exiles and Essence Scatters with extra copies of Negate in the sideboard. Will the first relevant spell cast in the game be a Planeswalker? Sounds like you need Negates in the main board with Path to Exiles in the sideboard, and maybe mainboard Deprive isn't that unrealistic. Question of the week for Standard that's had many answers over the past couple of months. Is Jund the deck to play? Even if it's only won 1 out of 3 of these tournaments, is it still proving the most resilient deck with the best options? One month ago, rumors spread about Wizards creating a new super extended Eternal format that would encompass every set from Mercadian Masks forward. However, not being a huge fan of Legacy because of its immense time investment needed and initial cost, but don't get me wrong, it's a very skill-intensive format, I liked this idea because it would allow a format where you could play pretty much any deck in Extended and a few from Vintage, while still only having to drop $500 to $1,000 for a deck rather than $2,000 or $3,000. But still, how is Wizards supposed to support a potential tournament format like Super Extended? How are they supposed to cash in on Legacy? That is, except by forcing the price of packs up by printing a Jace the Mind Sculptor every year. The answer is they can't support either directly without screwing with the prices of cards like Force of Will on the secondary market. Then again, I suppose we have the same current problem with Extended. I mean, after 6 years of being in the format, a card like Umezawa's Jite is bound to go up to $100 a playset at least, which, when put in decks to play another $1,000 worth of cards that had the same abysmal cost rise happen to them, makes the deck you want to play just cost too much money. However, with last Friday's Extended update, the format will now only encompass 4 years of Magic sets, making it like a double standard, no pun intended, instead of being 3.5 times regular standard. Fortunately, this makes the format twice as accessible, assuming there are enough decks that won't play Baneslayer, Vengevine, Cryptic Command, Bitter Blossom, or just about any collection of Planeswalkers. Though, I foresee variants of Fairies dominating the field, being that Zoo will be straight up dead, but the question is there enough hate to deal with a Fairies epidemic if this involves cards like Jace the Mind Sculptor controlling the opponent's draws and keeping them from Great Sable Stags or Volcanic Fallout? Or will the new Fairies deck with its ability to easily splash a third or fourth color outside the usual blue and black have even more answers to Great Sable Stag and Volcanic Fallout, including Lightning Bolt, Earthquake, or who knows, even something as unknown as Bloodbraid Elves that cascade into Lightnings to make them discard the Volcanic Fallout? Then again, maybe Jund Fairies is stretching it a little. But what about the Sword of the Meek and Thopter Foundry combo and that amazing Hypergenesis deck that would both become broken if 3 years worth of old sets left? The answer is Sword of the Meek and Hypergenesis, despite rotating when Scars of Mirrodin comes out, are both being banned. Now, I'm not usually in favor of any cards in any format except Legacy being banned, and think it shows Wizards' lack of ability to have correctly designed and balanced the cards, but in this case, I'm okay with it. Now, question is, if broken cards like this that are broken because of degenerative combos they've been involved in, what about the other broken cards that are just plainly broken? I mean, there's been at least one of these in every block. The card that just costs too much money and gives too many options. Termaggoyf, Cryptic Command, the Cascade mechanic in general, are all examples of cards that are just too good on their own and will rise in price when this format becomes popular enough. And it will be more popular than old Extended. So, should we ban these cards too? Well, on one hand, if we ban these cards, there will be others to take their place, which are close seconds in their respective archetypes. For its power and toughness, Garruk's Companion is basically a replacement for Termaggoyf. Jace the Mind Sculptor takes the place of the decks playing Cryptic Command, even if it's not a hard counter, and Bituminous Blast is the tier 1.5 Bloodbraid Elf. On the other hand, the format becomes about as slow as Standard. But is that a good thing? My answer is no. In the end, what can we expect in this format? Will Fairies dominate, or is Jund good enough to beat out the Fairies with its Cascade and ability of Bloodbraid Elves into Lightning can only have one of the two spells countered by the Fae? Come Scars of Mirrodin this fall? We'll see. Half a year ago, the United States Mint began the printing of the 2010 dollars and coins, and the most interesting change you'll find is not the shield picture on the back of the pennies that says, "Screw you to the Lincoln Memorial" on it prior to this year, but the Latin phrase, "E pluribus unum." Honestly, I'm not sure how to pronounce that correctly. Anyway, this phrase translates to "out of many, one," which, aside from sounding like a weird communist manifesto, seems to represent, in terms of currency, the coming together of units, and prior to that, the separate units that make up the currency system. In Magic, you have two, technically three forms of currency. The first is the universal dollar. The second is the almost universal card. And the third, which is less used and slightly less recognizable as a trade currency, is the unopened booster pack. On one hand, a dollar has value to everyone because it functions as a piece of currency that acquires pretty much anything. A Magic card, on the other hand, only has value to Magic players who need or are willing to trade for the card, but is more important to the person trying to acquire it than the dollar if it has the potential to get them prizes or fun when used in a tournament. The third currency, a sealed booster, has some sort of value to all Magic players looking for a card from the set the pack is of. More people have some sort of value assigned to the booster than they do to a random card you might find in a binder. Though the problem with trading boosters is, to most people they're not worth the $4 value it would normally cost because there's too much randomness involved and they're probably only looking for 2 to 3 rares in the set. But because most Magic players understand the consequences of randomness, not many people trade boosters to just crack packs. But how do you know you should trade a card for another card, and when are you willing to trade it for less or more than retail? Well, my answer is to trade for up to 1.5 times retail value for a card you need for a tournament, or 75% retail when you're just trading cards. Don't make the trade otherwise. This way, if you trade 1 out of the 4 cards for the tournament you're playing in, you break even without being too much of an asshole about the non-tourney trades, but get all the cards you need. So until next week, when we take a look at Arch Enemy, the newest Magic 2011 spoilers, and a Rise of the Eldrazi draft, this is Anthony Palmeria, on behalf of the Professors. We're tapped out for now, but we'll untap soon.